And we don't see childhood through the eyes of children because we're adults. See it through our own eyes and our own expectations when a lot of us haven't really been taught about child development.
Today we have Dr. Alison Burrows, who's a child development expert, professor of education and childhood studies, and a certified parenting coach and educator. She will be speaking to us about how children and technology can go hand in hand, the harmful uses of technology, and what is brain-based parenting technique. Dr. Alison and everyone, welcome to Million Opinions.
Thank you.
You did your research on something to do with technology. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I did my research for my doctorate on meaningful learning with technology for elementary school age children. And as part of that research, I really investigated how the developing brain interacts with and relates to technology, and how that technology can at times be beneficial, potentially, and at other times can be harmful.
So when you say technology being harmful, can we go delve in that?
Typically, depending on the age of the child and the things that they are doing online for excessive amounts of time, that's when technology gets harmful. For example, gaming. So a lot of games are very purposefully designed to get the child or the adult, the player in general, addicted, right, to use it for as long as possible. And technology companies who create these kinds of games have hired, the top algorithm designers in the world to implement something called dark patterns. And when dark patterns are implemented, these dark patterns are used as a reward system so that dopamine is consistently excreted in the brain. And because the dopamine is consistently excreted in the brain and the levels of dopamine in the brain are really high, it is very hard for the child or the adult, if the gamer is an adult, to withdraw from the game. It's like almost taking a drug. Again, this isn't true for every child, every adult, every gamer. I don't want to be alarmist, but we are seeing, especially in preteen and teenage boys, higher instances of mood swings, aggressive behavior, anxiety, depression. And researchers believe and have consistently shown in study after study after study that these excessive dopamine levels in their brain from all of the gaming are interfering with healthy brain development. In addition, these games are experience blockers. So the child is on the iPhone, the tablet, gaming all day rather than doing what a kid needs to do, which is go and play with other kids, go outside and play, have unstructured play, have a variety of different kinds of play in different areas. Because from an evolutionary perspective, the child develops and grows through play.
Alison, I'm glad that I'm having this conversation with you because our episode is releasing in July, and that's the month where the children are done with schools in the UAE and they have their break. Some don't know what to do, so many of them would want to go do more screen time.
Yeah.
So when you say prolonged amounts of screen time?
So that's a really complicated question because every child is unique. So a child who is more likely to be hyperactive should probably have less screen time than a child who is not. However, according to the American Association of Pediatrics, as well as the American Association of Juvenile Psychiatry, children under 2 should get 0 screen time a day. And let's come back to that because that's really critical. Children between the ages of 2 and 5 can have an hour of screen time during the weekday.
Okay.
And up to 3 hours during the weekend. And then the amount of time increases from there. So children from 6 to, I don't have the statistics memorized, 6 to 12, I believe it's about 4 hours. And then for high school age children who are on the screen for school, I believe the recommendation is no more than 5 hours a day. But again, the associations aren't recommending that your child be on a gaming app or social media for 5 hours a day.
So we are talking only about children, but it's not really beneficial to adults as well because we also need a dopamine detox.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for me to get off my phone at times. So I can only imagine how difficult it is for a child.
Yes.
So how exactly do we detox?
That's a great question, but I just want to go back a little to sleep and why sleep is so important and why screens tend to be the sleep experience blockers, right?
Yep.
We're not sleeping, we're online. Magical things happen when we sleep. Our brain takes information and moves it from the working memory to the long-term memory. This is really important for children who are in school and who have to learn. The other thing is sleep is the detoxifier of the body. When we sleep, we prepare our bodies for a healthy next day. Sleep is strongly correlated to growth in children, to healthy development in children, to mood regulation and mood stabilization in children. So all of this screen time, especially before bed, is not suggested. Moreover, screens emit blue lights. I'm sure you've heard about this.
Yes.
Yeah. So blue light actually disrupts the melatonin hormone secretion. So now the melatonin levels are not at homeostasis, so sleep is even further interrupted. So they're not only not getting sleep, but the sleep that they're getting is not hormonally balanced. Number two, your children are watching you. So that beautiful little baby you have at home is going to grow up looking how mommy and daddy interact with technology. And what is she going to learn? She's going to learn by watching you, how you interact with technology. So while we don't think our technology use is bad for our child, right? I'm the one scrolling all day. Why should I worry about my child? Because your use of technology is blocking you from having the bonding experiences, building the relationship, building the trust, building the connection, building all of those beautiful things that your kid needs to have with you. Your child needs to feel that you are present for them in order to have a secure attachment. And if you're always on the phone, can you be present for your child? Will your child feel seen? Will your child feel heard? Will your child feel validated if you're constantly staring at a screen? And then the last thing I'd like to say is the part of the brain that is responsible for impulse control, that part of the brain is in the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that controls impulse, self-regulation, executive function, planning, critical thinking, decision-making, problem-solving. How can we expect our kids and our teens to put down an addictive game when that part of the brain hasn't even developed yet? That part of the brain becomes mature at 25 years old. So how do we get our kids off the screen when the part of their brain that's responsible for that function is still developing? It's very complicated. We have to have boundaries and rules around this.
I saw one of your posts where you said we don't let our kids drive at the age of 9 or smoke or drink. Then why do we give phones, smartphones?
Yeah.
So what would be an appropriate age where they get the phone?
Again, there's no magic number. It depends on your child, what the child is using the phone for, how often they use the phone, where are they using the phone, with what other people in the room are they using the phone. For my daughter, she has to have an iPad for school. And as of recently, I'm really, really starting to question this because she's in elementary school, primary school. And at this point, I'm beginning to believe it's unnecessary for her to have that. That's another conversation. However, I do not want her having a smartphone until she's at least 14. Absolutely no social media until she's a minimum of 16. If she has reached a level of maturity and self-confidence where she's not going to get caught in a trap of negative social comparison. And this is why we're seeing that the rates of suicidality, anxiety, self-harm, depression in girls, adolescent and preteen and teen girls, has more than doubled for Generation Z because they are scrolling through social media, instant pictures, Facebook, all of these different apps, and they're comparing themselves to these celebrity standards and these AI-generated images of these, perfect supermodels. And that's very, very hard for a developing brain to come to terms with. These girls are in a process of their own identity formation, which is hard enough as a teenager. Now they're managing their own brand online and comparing themselves to supermodels who have a whole team of people keeping them fit and beautiful, as well as Photoshop.
What is brain-based parenting technique?
A brain-based parenting technique. So a brain-based parent is one who's really informed about the neuroscience, how the brain develops. And we can take that information and leverage it to become more attuned and connected to our kids. So for an example, a brain-based parent understands that the brain has a lower part and an upper part. The lower part of the brain is the primitive part of the brain. From an evolutionary perspective, it's the oldest part of the brain that we used when we were hunter-gatherers. And we had to have very fast reactions if we were in danger. So the lower part of the brain, the child is actually born with a fully developed lower brain because, again, that part of the brain is responsible for survival. The upper part of the brain doesn't start to develop until a child is 3 or 4, and that's the part of the brain that's responsible for executive functioning, reasoning, being rational, critical thinking. So a brain-based parent understands that when a 2-year-old is having a temper tantrum, it's because the 2-year-old is functioning in lower brain. And to use fear, punishment, shame, labeling, yelling on a 2-year-old is age inappropriate for the 2-year-old and is not going to work. A 2-year-old does not have another way to express anger, frustration, pain. A 2-year-old doesn't have the skills to go into their upper brain and say, you know what, I'm going to use nonviolent communication to tell my mom that I want to keep on playing. No, it's impossible. Many times parents think that kids won't do something when in fact a child cannot do something. And a lot of parents are very uncomfortable when their child has a temper tantrum and a big reaction. But a brain-based parent would look internally and become really comfortable with their child's discomfort. So rather than reacting to their child's tantrums and misbehavior from a place of fear and being defensive, the brain-based parent says, my child is acting this way because a need is not being met. He or she doesn't have any other skills to express herself. So I'm going to come in and provide this child with relational safety. I'm going to connect on a very deep level. I'm going to wait till she calms down, and then we'll talk about it without fear, without punishment, without a power struggle, labeling or judging.
So how does that look like? With an example, please.
Okay, so let's say you're with your child at the supermarket, and she doesn't want to be there, and she's screaming, I want to go home. This is boring. I hate the supermarket. You would understand that the child is acting in the lower part of her brain, and you would validate what she's saying. So, I understand you're not happy in the supermarket. Thank you for sharing that with me. I hear you. But you also need to enforce your own boundaries and your own values. So you would say, I'm going to try to leave the supermarket as soon as possible. What can we do together to help you through this experience? Now, the 2-year-old child won't know. 2-year-old child will say, give me candy or keep on screaming, right? But the fact is you have validated the child's feelings. Typically, that makes them less reactive and more responsive. If they keep on crying, then let them cry. This isn't a problem that has to be solved. The child needs to learn that you have to get the grocery shopping done, whether they like it or not, and you have to not punish them for expressing how they feel. if that makes sense.
It does, but most of the time, as parents, we get embarrassed.
Of course, we get very embarrassed. Oh, God, what are they going to think? My child's screaming in the supermarket. They'll think I'm a bad parent.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that I have not taught my child well.
That's right.
So it's our insecurities that we went out on the child.
Yes. But think about that in terms of mindset. Collectively, as adults and parents, we're judging each other because a child is crying in the supermarket. That to me is completely insane.
Yes.
How come nobody has taught parents? How come there's no parenting school before you have a child that tells you about these things? That this is how a child expresses herself or himself at a certain age, and they don't have skills to do it otherwise. Can't we just all be more tolerant of each other's parenting and less judgmental?
Yes, that is true. We expect others to be very understanding when it comes to us, but when it comes to somebody else, we are not very understanding.
And we don't see childhood through the eyes of children because we're adults. See it through our own eyes and our own expectations, when a lot of us haven't really been taught about child development.
As parents, how do we learn all these things? How do we learn the language to communicate with brain-based parenting techniques?
So I do a lot of parenting coaching. I work with both private clients one-on-one, teaching these techniques. I also do parent education programs anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks where we meet as a group. And I can also refer parents to books where this kind of information is translated in a very relatable and understandable way.
You said that ideally for children below the age of 2, no screen time would be a good thing.
Yes.
Well, I'm guilty because I gave my daughter screen time during that stage.
Yeah.
And it's not because I didn't want to give her my time. It's just that probably while driving, she was really screaming and I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness, is she okay? So I did check.
Yeah.
She was full. She was clean. Her diapers were fine. But she was constantly
She didn't
crying.
want to be in the car.
She just didn't want to be in the car. And she's screaming. I mean, I don't blame her, but that really can be distracting. But the minute I give her the phone, she was fine. And I was like, okay, you know what, that helps my drive, which is easy, a 30-minute drive. Yeah. And for 30 minutes, my daughter was watching something on the phone. When I say something, it was appropriate for the child.
Okay.
But now I feel, oh my goodness, okay. Have I done something wrong?
I'm guilty too. So when my daughter was very little and this research hadn't really come out yet, I would let her watch Sesame Street songs on my phone when I needed to go to the bathroom, make dinner. You know, the screen is an excellent babysitter. And yes, when they're screaming in the car, it's so horrible for the parent because you feel they're screaming deep inside of you and you want to do everything you can to stop them from their screaming. Yeah, it gets under your skin. Yeah, so you give them the phone. I'm not saying that's bad. She wasn't on the phone for 6 hours strapped into the backseat of a car day after day after day. You gave her the phone with age-appropriate content to get her through the drive. That might have been better than all of the cortisol secreted in her brain had she screamed the whole way. So again, everything is very context specific. Did you give her a cartoon with fast-moving images?
Well, it was Cocomelon.
Okay.
And then later they told that it's very stimulating for the brain, so it's very difficult for them to get off. There are other...
Cocomelon? Yeah. I haven't seen, that's a little bit beyond my daughter's childhood. So the images on Cocomelon are changing very quickly, every 6 seconds or so?
Yes.
Okay.
So and then later... When I say later, I mean very late, I came to know that there are other options that we can work with. But then again, what's done is done. I feel bad about it, but I'm going to work towards how to...
But here's the good news. The brain has neuroplasticity. The brain has the capacity to change. So in the first 1,500 days, in the first 1,001 days of life, the brain is making 1 million connections a second. So the reason why we don't want kids on screens for the first 1,001 days is because they should be having a lot of different robust sensory experiences. Tasting, touching, smelling, feeling, moving their bodies, interacting, eye contact, serve in return, which is when you go goo, 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 and they repeat back to you before they can even talk, goo, 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 goo. Those things get the brain firing and making the connections that the brain needs as the solid foundation for the rest of their life. If they're on the screen, the connections the brain make are not going to be as robust or as meaningful. They will be connections made from sitting and watching a screen and probably being overstimulated by the fast-moving images on the screen. There's no taste, there's no touch, there's no smell, there's no back and forth human interaction.
Well, you are a parenting
Yes.
expert, so I'm gonna ask you a few questions.
Sure.
When it comes to the nutrition of a child, we are very concerned as parents that they eat right, they eat a very nutritious meal, and that's also sometimes when I put the screen on.
Yep.
Because I can sneak in some vegetables, and my daughter can eat it.
That's right.
So, is that a bad thing?
Oh gosh, listen. Again, right? It's like she'll eat vegetables at the expense of watching Cocomelon. I mean, so I always tell parents that I might be the expert on child development and education and the research. I'm constantly engaging with the research, but I'm not an expert on your child. I don't know your child. I want to empower you to make informed decisions because you are the expert on your child, not me. So if this is the only way to get vegetables down her throat and you're showing her age-appropriate content for a short amount of time and interacting with her while she's watching this, do I think it's so bad? I don't, but I don't know your child. What if your child's neurodiverse? It'll have a different effect than if your child is not neurodiverse.
Does screen time affect neurodiversity?
Yes. It doesn't cause neurodiverse. Well, at this point, a lot of researchers are saying that excessive screen time is contributing to a attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Absolutely. However, I've heard parents say, don't let your child use virtual reality. It causes seizures. Don't you let your child use augmented reality. It causes epilepsy. No. A child is already epileptic. Using virtual reality might cause or instigate an epileptic seizure. So it's not that the technology is causing this, it's that the child has a predisposition. However, with ADHD, I do think technology is strongly contributing to ADHD, and I have to say my ability to attend has greatly decreased over the last, I would say, decade as well. And as of recently, I have turned all notifications off my phone. All, 100%. If there's an emergency, someone has to call me. My ringer's on, no more notifications, because I noticed I read a lot on my phone. I like to read the paper, I like to read research articles, and when I'm reading, I will get notifications from WhatsApp, email, these kinds of things. So my ability to focus just on what I'm reading is being interrupted every 10, 15 seconds. And that is going to make an impression on the brain. So for little children who are forming the ability to pay attention, right? That's something that gets wired in the brain over time through extended periods of free play. I know play doesn't look like they're paying attention, but when they're playing, they are hyper-focused on what they're playing. It's extraordinary. So now we put a phone in front of them. Images are constantly changing. They're overstimulated. There's dopamine secreted in the brain. How are their brains supposed to wire properly to pay attention? So under 2 years old, try not to use it as much as possible. If you're using it to get broccoli in your baby, put on a show like Blue's Clues if you can. A show where the images are not changing. Think about the world we live in. Look at this room we're sitting in now. Nothing is moving. This is how our brains have evolved. Our brains haven't evolved to look at images changing every 6 seconds or less. Yeah, so shows like Blue's Clues, Teletubbies, these shows were created by child development experts. They had psychiatrists, psychologists, educators as consultants on the show, making sure that the show is aligned to the characteristics of optimal development that we want. Sesame Street.
I used to watch Sesame Street growing up. Yeah.
I still like Sesame Street.
I do. Cookie Monster's my favorite character.
Oh, I think mine was Oscar the Grouch.
Okay.
I liked that the character had permission to be grouchy. Because when I was growing up, there was no permission to be grouchy. I was parented by very traditional parents who used shame and punishment and yelling because they believed that that was the way to turn me into a high-functioning adult who is capable of, interacting with other human beings in society. So there was no room for grouchiness. My feelings were dismissed. Yeah.
And that's why you always talk about brain-based parenting technique where you acknowledge the child's feelings.
Yeah. What if my parents had said to me, it's okay to be upset about this. You can feel your feelings. They're just temporary. And when you're done feeling sad, let's work together to figure out how you can process these feelings, how you can make sense of these feelings. Isn't that a great way to teach your child the skill of emotional intelligence rather than telling them, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about? We're not teaching skills when we punish our child. We're just pushing them into a state of fear, a state of fight, flight, or freeze. That's not teaching a skill. That's just filling them with toxic stress.
There was something that you mentioned about children in the US saying that they want a smartphone for security reasons.
Yes. And it's not just the US. And I don't think the child wants it for security reasons. The child wants it because it's a phone, it's technology. The parent wants the child have it for safety reasons. Right. So we've seen that since the late 1980s, late 1990s in the US and other English-speaking developed countries, that children are helicopter parented, meaning the parents are constantly watching them, constantly on top of them, micromanaging them, scheduling their everyday, never letting them take risks, never letting them go outside and play unobserved. And this has had a real consequence on the developing child because the child hasn't had a chance to build the skills they need to build by successfully managing risks, by falling down and getting back up. We can't teach a child resiliency if we never let them fall down and get back up. So I grew up in the States, and I remember in the 1980s when we would be sitting at the breakfast table and the milk carton would be on the table, there would be a photo of a missing child on the back of the milk carton, and this was all over the United States. So parents immediately had this idea that if their child goes out and play, they'll get kidnapped. And this permeated through every level of society, and parents stopped letting their kids go outside and play unattended. So according to a lot of the social psychologists who have been writing about the end of the play-based childhood, this is something that happened that negatively contribute to child development. We don't let them climb trees anymore because they're going to fall down and hurt themselves. But there's something so important about climbing a tree because the child gets to experience fear on their own terms. They can decide if they're going to go higher or lower and manage that fear themselves. They get to experiment with being afraid through an act of play. But as parents, he's going to fall down, break his arm, hospital. And then these kinds of things we do as parents, blocking our children from having the critical experiences they need to fall down and get back up, to get hurt and recover, to be sad. Think about kids nowadays. My daughter, for example, when she has a gymnastics competition, everybody goes home with a trophy.
And are you for it?
No, I'm not for it. And this is controversial, and a lot of parents may not, agree with me. And you're allowed. Everybody's allowed to not agree with me. I respect all opinions. But how can we teach our children to lose? How can we teach them to lose? How can we teach them that when they lose, they don't lose the lesson? Why are we rewarding all children for everything. How does that manage their expectations of what life is supposed to, or will be in the future? They're going to confront a lot of losses. They're going to try to get jobs. They're not going to get them. When that child who won every trophy growing up, when she doesn't get the first job she applies for, how is she going to manage that? When she gets a major rejection, she didn't get into university, right? She didn't get the lead in the school play. How is she going to manage that? How are we teaching resilience unless we let our kids take risks? So this is why social scientists believe that what's happening with cell phones and social media and gaming is worse than it would be if our kids had a play-based childhood. If our kids developed the skills of resiliency in childhood, maybe they wouldn't be engaged in so much social comparison. If we allowed kids to form their own identities through play, maybe they wouldn't be so susceptible to wanting to look like the athlete and the hero and the supermodel that they see online.
Do you think we allow our children to form their own personality, or do you think it's highly influenced by the parents?
There are a couple of things. So when the child goes into puberty, that is the time of identity formation. And if you think about the evolutionary brain, right, the oldest part of our brain is, in order to survive, you have to be part of the herd, right? The herd mentality, safety in numbers. So the way we form our identity is very, very, very consistent with the culture and the context we live in. So yes, of course, parents are going to have a huge impact on identity formation. And the peer group has a huge impact on identity formation, and that's normal. That's how the developing brain transitions from child who needs to be cared for to member of the herd who is caring for others, right? That group mentality. But now, children are trying to be accepted on social media and to complete strangers and to look like what they, and act like and be like what they perceive as an ideal, whether it's inside their culture or not. So that's what I see as really confusing and really hard for kids.
How does technology help in education?
Mm-hmm.
And when is it really unnecessary for us to use the gadgets? Are the teachers trained well enough?
So there are a lot of questions there, and I'm just going to completely rely on the research here. Not just my research, but the thousands of articles I've read about this, peer-reviewed journal articles. The peer-reviewed journal articles indicate that when you integrate technology in a school, there's not a significant improvement in student achievement. So when we take that apart, we see that kids might be more engaged when using technology as a learning tool, but they're not necessarily learning more or learning better. So right now, schools are spending a lot of money on digital tools, hardware, software, etc., but it hasn't improved learning. If you look at international standardized test scores, we don't see big increases in any country since technology has been rapidly integrated into schools and classrooms. The research also says that technology can support certain learning content under certain circumstances. So, for example, there was a researcher out of Johns Hopkins University, where I did my doctorate, who did an analysis of math apps. And he discovered that math applications can help children learn their math facts if they provide just-in-time feedback and personalized instruction for the child. So a teacher may have a hard time teaching 26 different ability levels in her classroom, but the math app can gauge where the child is in their learning and then give the child math problems at their ability level, and then come in and help the child correct the mistakes right as the child is making them, giving them that just-in-time support to help them be more successful. The other thing that the math app might do is help the brain form the connections around learning the math facts. 2 + 2, 7 × 3, 6 - 4, 30 - 15. The brain needs constant repetition and practice with that, and a math app can do that. But so can flashcards, right?
Yeah.
So can books. So can mommy quizzing the child. So again, we see that specific math apps can be helpful, but again, the statistical significance of how helpful these apps are and how much they contribute to improved learning is relatively small. So are we using these devices at the expense of the child? Because what we're seeing now, and you asked about teacher training and teacher development, so I created and run a Master's of Technology Integration at Middlesex University, Dubai. I teach the course. It's a pathway in our Master's of Education program. 100% of the teachers I teach, right? These are all practicing teachers across all of the Emirates. They come and study with us. 100% agree that they are not getting the professional development they need to use technology in a meaningful way. The trainers who come in and train them, who are, of course, trying to do their best, are often technocentric rather than teaching pedagogy, teaching the art of teaching with technology to the teachers. They're just showing them more how to use the app, how to sign in, where different things are, a very technocentric training. Teachers need to learn how to support meaningful learning using digital tools. Even when the teacher can teach children in a meaningful way using digital tools, the children are now multitasking. So while the teacher expects the child to be on this math app that could be helpful to the child has figured out a way to get past the firewall of the school and go on a chat group app or go on a social media app or watch YouTube. The kids are really smart. They know how to do this, and they share with each other how to get past the firewall and do this. And we can't expect a developing brain with poor impulse control to not get distracted by something as tempting as gaming or social media or YouTube. So as hard as the teachers are trying, this is what they're up against now, this digital distraction. It could be the most masterful teacher in the world, but is that masterful teacher going to be able to see what 26 different iPads are on in the classroom? It's not possible. So this is why I'm advocating at this point, very minimal technology use in primary schools. Our kids need to learn how to focus, how to pay attention. That part of the brain needs to form, and it's not going to form if they're digital multitasking, really if they're multitasking at all.
So during the rains, when the children were asked to stay at home, so my daughter goes to nursery.
Okay.
And they asked us to come online for classes.
Oh, I know.
And I saw many parents attending classes.
Of course.
Only the parents. The children, they were
well, they don't know how to log into Zoom. They can't spell.
No, true.
Yeah.
But then even then, they were not really engaged.
Of course not.
How can you do online classes for nursery?
I wholeheartedly disagree with it. However, we live in a society where education is privatized. So when COVID happened, parents had paid 10, 5, 20,000 dirham from nursery, and then schools shut down. So the school had a responsibility for the parents to get their money's worth. The school wasn't going to refund the money because of COVID. The school has teachers to pay. So they did the best they could by trying to provide learning experiences online. Can a little child learn online? Maybe they'll pick up some language. And there's also research that shows that language delay occurs as a result of excessive screen use. But no, so think about communication. Communication is 80% nonverbal. If I sat here talking to you like this, not very interesting, right? You're not interested in what I'm saying. Communication is very nonverbal, and kids can't read the nonverbal cues of communication online. It's the eye contact, the interaction, the body language, the tone of voice. That stuff gets lost. This is the theory of telepresence. So researchers are studying how they can make online environments just like real life. How can we increase telepresence in online environments? I'm not sure that's ever going to work for kids. They're so sensitive to nonverbal communication.
So recently you became a co-founder of Smartphone Free UAE. Tell us more about that.
So Smartphone Free Childhood started in the UK. And it started with one mom who was very, very concerned about the use of technology in her children's school. So she started a WhatsApp group to have a constructive dialogue with other parents' experiences about this. And it exploded. It took off. Overnight, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of users all over the UK. And this woman in the UK, one of her best friends lives in Dubai. And she said, oh, I'm going to start this here in Dubai. And at the same time that Amelia, who started in Dubai, was starting it, I had gone out and bought another SIM card so I can start it here too, because I feel like I'm in a position to help and disseminate the research in a way that people can make informed decisions. So just after I bought the SIM card to put in the phone to exclusively devote to this movement, someone sent me a link to Smartphone Free Childhood, UAE, and I immediately reached out to the administrator and I said, hey, let's partner on this. Let's work on this together. So she is also a mom of 4, very concerned about her kids' use of technology in school. And she's a recruiter and a data scientist. So she brings that piece, and then I'm bringing the research and the neuroscience and the teacher training and all of that stuff. And then there's another mom who's also contributing. So the 3 of us are really trying to start a constructive conversation about what kind of pressure can we put on schools to make sure that if technology is being used, it's being used in a way that's meaningful for the students. There are a lot of people on our group now, close to 500, who don't want technology at all in their children's schools. 0, period. And they're perfectly entitled to have that. However, we do see some misinformation in the chat. Again, parents saying, don't let your kids near virtual reality, it'll cause epilepsy, or don't do this, don't do that. So we want to create an environment where the research and the facts are informing parents and schools on the decisions they should be making.
So we are in the month of July. Schools are closing down.
Yes.
A lot of children, a lot of free time. What advice would you give to the parents?
So this is tough for the parents who stay in Dubai all summer, because I take my daughter to the US for several weeks over the summer, and we stay in my sister's house, which has a big backyard and is surrounded by forest. So my goal for my daughter is go outside and play. Play outside. Unstructured play. I'm not telling her how to play. I'm not intervening in her play. I also sent her to summer camp. No screens. She's outside playing, and she's playing with other kids. And hopefully she's playing with diverse age groups of kids, because that's really beneficial for child development. And she's connecting with her cousins, which is very important to me. I want my daughter to have a sense of belonging in a country, because since she's being raised in Dubai, she's not a citizen here. So she needs to have a place of belonging to the country where she has a passport. So if one day she has to go there because she can't get a job here or something, she feels like she belongs. So that's really important to me. Family connection, playing as much as possible outside. The outside provides opportunities to play that are, they're limitless.
You mean in natural surroundings?
Yeah. Kids take risks. There's a whole movement in Scandinavia, and this isn't a new movement, called outdoor school, where kids go to nursery and early primary outside 365 days a year, even in the dead of winter. And they're having outdoor play-based childhoods, which actually align to the lower part of the brain. These kids are ready for school when it's time to go to a traditional school. They're resilient. They have confidence. They know the limits of their body. They know how to navigate difficult social situations because they've been doing it all these years outside with other kids. Yeah, so take them outside and play. Give them diverse experiences. Well, not every parent has access to natural settings. Some parents, when they go home for the summer, they're in a city. So try to go to a park. Try to just change the environment that your child is in, because the different exposure to different environments wires the brain in a different way than staying in one place all the time.
And with diverse age groups as well.
Yeah. So the research on play, Dr. Peter Gray is someone who's been researching play for 40, 50 years at this point. He talks a lot about diverse age groups. The older children learn leadership skills. They learn authority. The younger kids then learn how to be part of a group. The younger kids also, it's very interesting when a child talks to a child, they can relay information in a way that an adult can't relay to a child.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that when my niece speaks to my daughter listens like it's the gospel.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Kids influence kids. And it can be so positive when we allow kids to influence kids in a positive and meaningful way without intervening and helicopter parenting them. So I saw kids on the playground today when I was picking up my daughter from school, and these two kids had just started arguing on the playground, right? Very normal. Kids need to learn how to argue and resolve conflict. And rather than letting the kids argue and work it out, boom, the teacher is there, intervening, trying to solve the problem right away. And that teacher, teachers are my people. I love teachers. They're so amazing. Can you imagine the work that they do for such a small financial reward? I mean, they're saints. So, of course, the teachers, they're trying to help these kids work it out, trying to teach them the social skills to work it out. But what if she hadn't intervened and really allowed them to take ownership of solving the problem? What if she had given them a chance to have autonomy in solving the problem? So this is what I'm saying, where we're overprotecting children in the real world, and this isn't my quote, by the way, overprotecting children in the real world and underprotecting children in the online world. This is what Jonathan Haidt, the author of the book, The Anxious Generation, professor at NYU, New York City, is talking about. That the brain of the child is literally being rewired because we're overprotecting them in the real world and underprotecting them online. A lot of them are doing whatever they want online. All of this excessive screen time is an experience blocker to what they should be doing in the real world, which is playing. But then when they're playing in the real world, we're constantly intervening. We're showing them how to play. We're telling them how to play. When they get into trouble, we're fixing it for them.
Well, I'm a coach, Alison. So is that a bad thing?
What do you coach?
I train children from the ages of 3 to 8. So I train them multi-sports.
Okay.
So multi-skills, I would say. Mm-hmm. So we teach them different skills.
Okay.
I know what the child needs to go through, and it's at their pace. But it's very difficult to convince the parent that multi-skill training for children and sports training for the adults are two different things.
Yeah.
But they don't see it that way. They see that, okay, I paid, I need results.
Of course, yeah. And these parents may or may not be trained on child development and developmental stages, and they may or may not be attuned to the developmental stage of their child in a way that you are by trying to teach them the skills that you're teaching them. So, yeah, they're paying, they want results, they want their kid to get into the best university, and if they're not exceeding in your class at 3 years old, then their whole life will be a mess. Yeah. And it's really easy for parents to fall into that trap that if my 7-year-old does bad on one spelling test, he's not going to go to a top university and he'll never make enough money to support himself or the family and it'll all be ruined. We all kind of think that way, and we have to stop ourselves.
But thank goodness I thought it was only me.
Of course. And say, oh, he's 7. Oh, she's 3. Yeah. Yeah. We really need to understand the developmental level of children and what they're capable of at each developmental level. So there's a lot of pressure on you to get kids to succeed. They may not be ready to succeed in certain areas. We don't have a baby run a marathon before they learn how to crawl. Learning skills, learning anything is like weightlifting, right? We start with the lightest weights and we work our way up to heavier weights. We would never put a 20-kilogram dumbbell in front of a child and ask them to lift it, a small child. But parents have been so conditioned to get their 3-year-old to lift that 20-pound, 20-kilogram dumbbell so their child can get ahead in this very competitive world we live in. It's really difficult. It's difficult for the parent and the child. The child wants to please the parent.
Alison, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. I would love to call you on a future date as well to speak on various other topics.
Sure.
And probably also ask you about how the smartphone-free childhood UAE is going.
Yeah, let's see. And as a professor and researcher, I'd like to start collecting data about parents' perceptions of children's technology use, as well as children's actual patterns of technology use in the UAE. So hopefully that could be a research study that I do. I get a large sample size and I can publish the data, and we can use that data to make meaningful choices.
And I wish you all the best for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you, everybody.